There's a specific type of person who's smart enough to know better and still doesn't. High earner, sharp mind, top of the field, and somehow financially a slow-motion accident. You'd think being smart would protect you. It doesn't. The smartest people I know, doctors, engineers, lawyers, founders, carry some of the worst financial decisions I've ever seen. And not in spite of being smart. Sometimes because of it. That's what this video is about. The 4 ways intelligence stops being a shield and starts being the problem. In 2009, a cognitive scientist named Stanovich published a book at Yale with a quiet, brutal thesis. IQ tests, he argued, capture important parts of cognitive ability, but they miss something just as important. They don't measure judgment. They don't measure decision-making. They don't measure whether you actually use the intelligence you have. Stanovich has a name for this gap. He calls it dysrationalia, the failure to think rationally despite having adequate intelligence. And nowhere does that failure show up faster than with money. You probably already know someone like this. You might be someone like this, smart in every room of your life except this one. It's not weakness. It's not laziness. It's something else, and it's worth naming. Walk into any prestigious profession and you'll find the same pattern. Doctors who can diagnose a rare condition in 90 seconds but can't tell you their own savings rate. Engineers who solve optimization problems all day but optimize nothing about their own money. Lawyers who read every clause of every contract, except the ones attached to their own credit cards. This isn't a stereotype. It's a pattern, and it's documented across behavioral finance. The smartest people in the room consistently make some of the worst financial decisions. Not random ones, not occasional ones, but predictable ones. And what's interesting is that intelligence doesn't just fail to help here. In some specific ways, it actively makes things worse. For mechanisms. That's it. Once you see them, you can't unsee them. Let's go. Mechanism 1. The competence transfer fallacy. It works like this. You spend a decade becoming excellent at one thing, your craft, your field, your specialty. You can perform open-heart surgery, write production code, win cases in court, build companies. And somewhere along the way, your brain makes a quiet, unspoken assumption. If I'm this good at that, I must be at least average at this. Except expertise doesn't transfer like that. It never did. Research on expertise going back decades, including foundational work by Chi, Glaser, and Farr, shows that skill is highly domain-specific. Being highly trained in one field doesn't make you competent in another. Personal finance has its own knowledge, its own rules, its own counterintuitive habits. It's a domain. But here's the part the engineering brain misses. The money domain doesn't reward what you've trained for. Take the actual example. A senior engineer, sharp, respected, well-paid, top of their team, carrying a credit card balance at 24% APR. Not for a month, for years. And nobody at work knows. Not their team. Not their manager. The competence at the office, the chaos at home, they live in different rooms. And the person walking between them is just exhausted. Not because the math is hard. The math is trivially easy for them. Because they never built the habit, the system, the attention. The domain was never theirs. You're not stupid for missing this. Your brain was built to specialize. Specialization has a cost. Everything outside the specialty stays raw. The fix isn't to be smarter. You're already smart. The fix is to treat personal finance as a separate discipline that needs its own deliberate practice. Track 3 numbers monthly: net worth, savings rate, debt. That's it. That's the entry-level domain knowledge. Not glamorous, but it's the actual work. Mechanism 2. Overconfidence in self-diagnosis. This one is harder to see in yourself than the others. That's the whole problem. Ask any analytically minded person how they handle their money. Watch what happens. I'm pretty good with money. I'm rational about it. I think clearly about finances. Then ask when they last opened a spreadsheet of their own cash flow, or checked their actual asset allocation, or audited their subscriptions. The silence is the answer. In a 2016 book called The Rationality Quotient, Stanovich and his colleagues spent years separating two things most people treat as identical: intelligence and rationality. Related but not the same. Intelligence is the engine. Rationality is whether you actually steer it. Most IQ tests measure the engine. Almost nothing measures the steering. which sets up the exact trap. The people most confident in their financial judgment are often the least likely to audit it. It's like refusing a physical because you feel fine. Back in 1981, a researcher named Ola Svensson found that 93% of American drivers rated themselves above average behind the wheel. Mathematically impossible, but emotionally the default setting. In a 2007 paper, Stanovich and West tested whether this overconfidence about your own judgment scaled with intelligence. They measured cognitive ability through SAT scores and checked whether higher scorers showed less bias about themselves. The correlation came back at 0.064 in one experiment, 0.050 in another. Statistically flat. Higher SAT didn't reduce the bias. That's not a number about strangers. That's a number about you. Smart people don't audit themselves. They explain themselves. There's a difference. The brain runs a constant story of why you're doing fine. And the smarter the brain, the more convincing that story is to itself. The fix isn't more thinking. It's external audit. And I'll be honest with you, that first audit is uncomfortable. The numbers don't match the story you've been telling yourself. They never do. But that discomfort is the moment something changes. Before that, you were just a person telling stories about your money. After, you're someone who knows, a real spreadsheet, a real conversation with a partner, a real advisor, not for advice, for verification, something outside your own head. Mechanism 3. Rationalization horsepower. This is the moment after a big purchase when the smart person reaches for the calculator. Resale value, tax deduction, opportunity cost of not buying. The math gets built backward to justify what was already decided. You know the moment I'm talking about. It's almost always after midnight. The decision is already half made. The calculator isn't there to figure out if you should. It's there to make sure you can live with what you already chose. In 1990, the psychologist Kunda published a paper that named this exact pattern. Motivated reasoning. The brain doesn't decide what's true, it decides what it wants to be true, then builds the case. Kunda made a careful distinction. There's accuracy motivation, wanting to be right, and there's directional motivation, wanting to reach a specific conclusion. When directional motivation wins, the reasoning still feels rational. It just isn't. Now, here's where intelligence stops being a defense and starts being a weapon pointed at yourself. In 2013, Dan Kahan ran a study on motivated reasoning and a measure of reflective thinking called the cognitive reflection test. The result wasn't what you'd expect. In some contexts, people with higher cognitive reflection scores didn't show less bias. They showed more. Higher horsepower. Same wrong direction. Faster. A higher capacity brain doesn't dismantle bad ideas. It builds better-looking justifications around them. The car you couldn't afford. The house bigger than the family. The startup equity you held while it cratered. Each one defended later with paragraphs of logic that arrived after the decision was already made. And here's the part nobody admits out loud. It hurts more when you're smart. Because you can see exactly what you did. And you still can't quite stop doing it. The fix is older than any of this research. Psychologist Gary Klein calls it a premortem. Before any major financial decision, write the justification before you make the move. Not after. If the reasoning is real, it'll exist in advance. If it isn't, you'll see the gap. Mechanism 4. The expertise blind spot. In 2005, an economist at Yale named Shane Frederick published a 3-question test in the Journal of Economic Perspectives. Here's the first question. A bat and a ball cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? The intuitive answer is 10 cents. The intuitive answer is wrong. The ball costs 5 cents. Second question. If 5 machines take 5 minutes to make 5 widgets, how long do 100 machines take to make 100 widgets? Intuitive answer 100 minutes. Correct answer 5. Third. Lily pads double every day. Takes 48 days to cover the lake. How long to cover half? 24. No. 47. Frederick called this the cognitive reflection test. 3 questions. What it measured wasn't intelligence. It measured something more specific, whether you'd override your first instinct with a second thought. In Frederick's data, higher CRT scores were associated with more patient choices in money now versus money later questions. and with risk choices more sensitive to expected value. But here's the catch. The test doesn't filter by degree. PhDs answered 10 cents. Engineers answered 100 minutes. Lawyers answered 24 days. The test wasn't measuring intelligence. It was measuring whether intelligence bothered to show up. You can have the IQ of a physicist and still pay for express shipping on a $12 item. The fix is mechanical. For any financial decision above $500, 48 hours. No exceptions. No, I already thought about it. The reflection your brain skipped in 3 seconds happens in 48 hours, whether you feel like reflecting or not. Now pushback, because there's a version of this that's wrong. Plenty of smart people handle money well. Behavioral economists who actually run their own premortems. Engineers who built spreadsheets that beat half the industry. The point isn't that intelligence guarantees failure. It doesn't. The point is that intelligence without the right disposition doesn't help. And sometimes, when it powers rationalization without auditing, it actively hurts. Stanovich's own work is the proof. The people who score high on rationality measures aren't the smartest. They're the ones who know intelligence alone isn't enough. Humility about your own cognition is the most underrated financial skill there is. It's not about thinking less of yourself. It's about thinking less about yourself and more about the work. All right, you know what's happening. Let's talk about what you can actually do. For fixes. 1 per mechanism. None of them complicated. 1. Treat personal finance as its own domain. Track 3 numbers monthly. Net worth, savings rate, debt. That's the entry-level expertise. 2. Quarterly external audit. Open the real spreadsheet. Show it to a partner, a friend, an advisor. Anyone outside your own head. 3. Premortem on every major purchase. Write the justification before, not after. 4. The 48-hour rule on anything above $500. No exceptions. The reflection your brain skipped gets done by the calendar. None of these require being smart. They require being deliberate. That's the actual skill. If you want to go deeper into this, the difference between intelligence and rationality, and why one doesn't protect you from the other, Daniel Kahneman's thinking, fast and slow is the most accessible starting point. It explains the architecture behind every mechanism we just talked about. Link in the description. Affiliate, full transparency, but the book stands on its own. Before we close, I want to talk to you directly for a moment. Not as a viewer, as the person on the other side of this screen. I want to say something here that doesn't show up in any of the research. The smartest people I've known who eventually got their money right, they didn't suddenly become more disciplined. They didn't read a different book. They didn't become someone else. What they did was admit, quietly and without an audience, that the part of their life called personal finance had never actually had their attention. Not their intelligence. Their attention. And from that admission, they started building slowly, the same way they built everything else they were good at. That part isn't glamorous. But it's how it actually happens, for everyone who eventually gets there. The smartest people I know aren't the ones who think clearly about money. They're the ones who built systems for the moments their thinking wouldn't be clear. Intelligence is the engine. Humility about that engine is the steering. For mechanisms, for fixes, none of them require you to be smarter than you already are. They just require you to stop assuming that being smart was ever the point. Nobody is coming to make this easy, and nobody needs to. You already have everything you need. You just have to stop assuming you've been using it on the right thing. Wealth doesn't reward intelligence. It rewards attention.